Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you all. Good evening. I'm Haytham Khoury. I'm the Director of Fellowships and Global Initiatives at the Legatum Center. And it is my pleasure to introduce our energy and climate resilience, infrastructure sustainment, environmental protection, planning, restoration, and natural resources conservation. It's a long list of wonderful things. And we're excited to have Ms. Berger with us for a discussion on the intersection of these sort of innovation, climate, and security within global growth markets. And I hope you all gain insights into how climate is currently a national security concern and how innovation can help ensure peace and security. Now, before we kick off and I hand it over to Fiona, I have also a special note from Dina Sharif, our Executive Director, who unfortunately cannot be with us. She is in Nairobi with our Foundry Fellows on an adaptive leadership retreat and ecosystem tour. But insisted I made sure I say this, and I read it verbatim. I'm so sorry that I could not be at this incredible event in person to welcome my dear friend Meredith to the center and to MIT, but I know you are in exceptional hands with Fiona and my team who are here with us. Many of you may be hearing from Meredith for the first time, but I want you to know a little bit more about Meredith beyond her title. You will quickly come to realize that she is a woman of great integrity and deep humility. She is also razor sharp smart and likes to apply her talents to always making this world a better place. I want to thank Meredith for her service, and I want to thank her for allowing all of us to learn from her tonight. To Fiona, thank you for moderating, and thank you for moderating what I know will be an incredible conversation. Thank you all again for joining us at the Legatum Center. Please a round of applause, and to you.
So
thank you both.
Well, thank you, Meredith. I so appreciate your being here with us. And I have this wonderful feeling that Dina is either with us right now watching. She is in Nairobi. We know it's sort of 1 a.m, but we have a feeling, don't we, that she might be watching us either live or if not live, she's definitely going to watch the recording. And it is an absolute pleasure. It's an honor to spend this time with you, Meredith. And it's a particular honor because you are somebody I've heard about from Dina, but really just, understanding what you do. And I just want to add my appreciation for the service that you pay to this country, but also as somebody from, an allied nation who at least hopes that we have a very special relationship with the United States. I want to say a very particular thank you as well for the work that you do. I think it's extremely important. So I wondered if I could start. You have an extraordinary sort of set of titles, and perhaps not one. If somebody said, what is there? Is there a job in the US Navy that includes the words energy and environment? They might not have thought that was true. And the word installations. So you have a collection of words around your responsibilities that I wonder whether you could just explain them to us, and perhaps tell us a little bit about where this job kind of came from, because I sort of had this image of history where it was the person responsible to make sure we had enough coal piles that could be shoveled into the coal-fired or coal-powered ships and things like that. So maybe you can tell us the origin story of this job.
Sure, and I agree with you. I think Dina has a way of being omnipresent, and she is masterful at orchestrating just the right thing at just the right time. And so I do think the only thing missing is her, but it just means I have to come back and visit again when Dina is here. So it is a little bit of a different job, and I'll shape it in this way. So the Department of the Navy has both the Navy and the Marine Corps, so two services underneath one department. And the way that we structure the military is you have civilian leadership that runs the department, and then you have service chiefs. And so it really is a complex organization in a lot of ways. But what falls into my portfolio, among all the various and sundry titles, is all of the things that make it so that we can have a ready force. And so readiness is a term of art in military circles mostly, but just to make sure that I'm setting the taxonomy and the language here straight. So readiness is when a sailor or Marine, in the case of the Department of the Navy, has everything that they need to do. So this is the training, the supplies, the places to train, to live, to work, all of the platforms, so that they can do what they need to do when they need to do it. And I'm intentionally broad there because the world calls on the Navy and the Marine Corps when there is a crisis, when there is support needed. And it is our job to respond. And the hour there is the civilian, the sailor, the Marine, because it is a team approach and it takes everybody to make sure that we're keeping up our end of the bargain. So that's my portfolio.
And can I just interrupt for a minute, because I think you also said ready.
Yes.
And I think people often assume that militaries, navies, Marines are only ready, need to be ready to go to war. And I think what we were talking about was that that's not really true. And so I wonder, just before we get into what the job really is, could you just tell us ready for what?
Yes, and if we're truly ready, then we're operating across a continuum. And the first part of that is actually diplomacy. So partnership, making sure that when we are making a commitment, so think an alliance, think any of the many different ways that we work together with different nations, different circumstances. It is that positive working together first in partnership. And that's diplomacy, which isn't the way that people immediately think of the Department of Defense. But even if you go around the world, you go to an embassy, and the first person you see is a Marine. So those are the first faces, and sometimes the only faces that people see. So next is deterrence. And so you want to make sure that people are recognizing that we've got a geopolitical order and that we are prepared to hold that order, hold shared values, hold the way that we operate in a global atmosphere. And so we use that readiness to make sure that we are practicing deterrence, because we don't want to be defense. Defense is the last thing. It's when you're actually having to actively engage in that conflict. And so that's the first line that I'll go across. But an often forgotten piece of military is we're first responders. And so you look at the different things that generate conflict around the world, and often the generator is a resource scarcity. And so as we look at different impacts of climate change, we see too much, too little water. We see impacts to agriculture, food scarcity. We see thermal stress. It is too hot or too cold. And it causes people to go and search for resources that are impacted. So it changes our ecosystem. It changes the way that everybody interacts together, and that's conflict. That's where most conflict generates. And so that is a place that you will see first response. We see strengthening storms, whether we're talking hurricanes or typhoons, and the first responders that will come in when there has been that destruction is actually the United States Marine Corps. We have a Title 10 responsibility, so under the law of the United States, to do crisis response. And so humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, when you see impact to different countries, different nations, we will go in and be that response force, because that's the diplomacy part. You keep up your agreement when you say that you're a partner under all circumstances, and that's another part of what our readiness is.
Great. Thank you. I just think, especially because we worry a lot about, and in the center we think a lot about growth markets, and places in the world that, as you've already said, are often subject to increasing amounts of stress, whether it's sort of heat, hot, cold, climate extremes of various kinds. Not that we haven't seen that obviously in the US or Europe, but we particularly see that, I think, in some of the markets and places that our students and the centre's fellows really deeply care about. But let me come back to your role. So we've talked about sort of what you have to be ready for, and so you're part of that readiness. And what are the areas of responsibility that you have to make sure that we're all ready for?
The full gamut. The title is Energy Installations and Environment. I'm also the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Department of the Navy, also responsible for our safety portfolio. So they really keep giving me the jobs. But I like to bucket it into 3 C's. I like alliteration, and
I'm going to write this down. All right, alliteration.
So communities, critical infrastructure, and climate action. And so communities, you think about everything from the natural and built environment to the values and the people and the ideas and the innovation that makes up the place that you work, learn, exist. It's what we defend. Then you look at critical infrastructure, and I like to flip this C a little bit, infrastructure in support of critical missions. And so you look at everything from training, energy, utilities, ports, depots, runways, everything that is going to facilitate our ability to meet mission, which is how we start and end everything. So critical infrastructure is another thing, another item that falls in my portfolio. And then lastly, climate action. Climate change is a national security threat. It is impacting every single thing that we do, whether it is the what we were just talking about in terms of being that crisis response force. We are a seafaring set of services, and so we operate off the coast. It turns out that sea level rise, flooding, powerful storms, coastal erosion takes away the places that we train. It takes away the resources that we count on to be our operational environment. And this is going to impact the way that we need to respond and also the environment in which we are going to be able to respond. So it gets us from both ends. And so we take climate action because we do not have a choice but to make sure that we are maintaining that advantage, whether it is in keeping our commitment in terms of being a partner, or if we get to the worst end of the other end of the spectrum, we want people to stay focused on mission. So it is a warfighting advantage if we get to that. And so that's how I like to frame up the places that I focus. And then I was telling you about the phrase "other duties as assigned."
Yes,
which
it sounds like you have plenty of those others as assigned, right?
So you take those two, but that's where I focus.
Right. And so I think, in many of the discussions, and if you were to be in other conversations, particularly in the financial community, which is a place I spent some time, you often sort of see people talking about ESG and climate action on the one hand, and they see it very much sort of as in tension with defense and security. And yet you're an individual who is absolutely at the heart of our national security apparatus and the Department of Defense and understanding how we defend our values, and yet you have climate in your title. And so I wondered if you could just say a little bit about how it is that as you say, climate has become a national security issue and national security sort of influences climate action. So how did has that been a journey for the department? I mean, how have you seen that evolve in your time being with the Department of the Navy?
So it has been present in our national security discussion and rhetoric for longer than I think people recognize, actually, since under our leadership, the George W. Bush administration identified national security identified climate change as a national security threat, and it was a topic that began to be integrated into our intelligence assessments, into the way that we were planning our operations, and it has gained in strength since that time because we have seen the impact gain in strength. And so it has so many different components because we expect everything to be, here's another word, survivable. And so whether you look at the impact of a storm or you look at the impact of heat on someone in training, we need to be able to overcome that impact to achieve the mission. And so as we look at different markets and places that we can participate, we are setting the requirements for what we need to see from the market. So we need material for our buildings that is both seismically and Miami-Dade Category 5 hurricane windproof and stormproof. We need to see a reduction in emissions when we create things like steel and concrete, when we are burning fossil fuels, and how we're operating our platforms, because it is that emission of the fossil fuels that go into the environment, which is our operational environment, and brings more threats to us in the form of storms, extreme temperatures, and more things that we need to respond to. And so it is, we can set the requirements so that the people who are out there that are creating the products, thinking of the ideas that are better than the ones that we're thinking of, know how to respond and actually move us forward in a way that increases everybody's ability to survive.
Yeah. So we talked about this again. Sometimes I think we imagine that the government is a sort of slow adopter of new solutions, but I think increasingly we're seeing that governments and defense, security, other departments can occasionally be first movers and can offer, as you've said, a sort of a market signal that says this is important. And so I wonder, there are lots of innovators here at MIT. We think a lot about how we solve big, difficult problems, and this is, one that is on the mind of, many, many people in our community. How do you share your challenges with the innovation community so that we can come along and say, oh, actually, we think we have a solution for you. We think we might be able to help with that. How do you do that? What's the way in which you speak to the innovation community around the world?
So a few different days. I will say first, anyone in the room who wants to talk afterwards, I am very glad to talk to you and learn from you, either in questions or afterwards. That is part of how you do. If you don't leave the Pentagon for a number of reasons, things have gone wrong.
Yes.
And so it is getting out to the places where people are thinking, making the connection that the Department of Defense, and I'll say especially the Department of the Navy, is accessible, is looking for ways to move forward. So we have the Office of Naval Research, which is one of the places that we can actually give seed money, grant money, and make sure that as we set a signal, we can put funding out there too to make sure that we're not just saying, please go think about this, but actually please go do this. And let's see what it looks like. And we have labs. We invite innovators in to be able to collaborate. Actually, one of the efforts that MIT has contributed to is our electric shipbuilding consortium. And so looking at how we transition this set of platforms to be more energy resilient and create that diversification. So we have different university consortiums. We also have a decarbonization consortium where we invite people in so that we can share information, share data, and make sure that we're setting those requirements so that we can see the responses, but also give the conditions so that you can meet military specifications and get to where we need to go. We also invest. So one of the things, it's always nice when you see things move through a process. And so back when I was staffer Berger in the Department of the Navy and sat in a lot of backbenches, I was working on how we would be able to contribute funding to an accelerator, which was kind of an out of this world thing. It was in 2013. Yep. And so that accelerator, we gave a few $1 million to, which got them going and helped with energy and material resilience types of initiatives, a lot of data analysis and putting data into action. They just changed their name. They're now called Elemental Impact, so they're an impact investment firm now. They've grown up a bit, but we have been able to give them about $90 million over the course of time, follow with that development and get the results of what it meant to move at the pace of the private sector, which is different, but we have to have these public-private partnerships because in isolation, nobody's doing as well as with the diversity of perspective and the sharing of information.
Right. And I think I'm right in saying you mentioned elemental impact, that they're in Hawaii, is that right?
That's right.
And so that, I think, starts us sort of thinking about and understanding the fact that your footprint is not just a continental US, right? And so your installations that you worry about and think about are all over the globe, I believe.
That's right.
And so many of those locations, I think, are quite proximate to some of the kinds of growth markets that we think a lot about here. And I'm wondering, do you see solutions coming from those places, and do you see opportunities to adopt some of these new things in some of the bases and things that are further afield?
It is. As you note, geographies breed the necessities that set requirements that allow us to see what works and what doesn't. And so everything is a little bit different. But if you go to Europe, you see energy innovation. People are changing the requirements and sourcing for where they'd like to see their energy come from. As we look at places like island nations that are really facing existential threats in terms of climate impacts, and it's playing out a lot in their energy portfolios. And so seeing that energy diversification is something that is common to island and coastal nations. And so in a lot of ways we get to see the drivers of the material, the ideas, and little labs of where it works to see how we can replicate, how we can adopt, how we can help to contribute to that, so that we are part of that ecosystem too. Because everywhere that you've got a defense footprint, we are part of a community, and community has defense in it, and that is very much. People talk a lot about a fence line. I don't see one a lot for a lot of reasons. There are so many interdependencies. You think about water, energy. If you're building housing somewhere, it's the same kind of requirement set. And so you work together to get that efficiency, that effectiveness, and the co-benefits. And so that's true no matter where we are in terms of our locations. And the advantage is everything is local as you get further down. And so we get to test, we get to see what's working and replicate what is working at one local level that applies in another one, or we tweak it and then can take it somewhere else. And so that's a way that we do our own application of lessons that we learn, because if you just learn them, it's no good. You have to apply them.
And so I remember a story from some time ago. There was a startup company here. It was originally called Liquid Metal Battery. It became known as Ambry, and it had a new sort of battery technology and a battery storage technology that the idea was that you could sort of put it in the grid and it would play an important role. And it was very, very difficult to go and test this out in New York City. Somebody said, well, who's responsible? How do we do this? Who do we have to get permissions from? And it turned out that one of the best places for them to test and to experiment was actually on a naval base, because that was a place that was a little more self-contained, and it was actually a sort of said, well, we're a test bed, we're happy to try new things. And so can you just talk a little bit about how you do that? So can you use your naval bases to test and evaluate in new ways? How does that work?
We can, and it's one of those great examples of a co-benefit, because we get to see the application of technology, and whoever has come up with the brilliant idea gets the chance to test it out. And so it is one of those places where we tend to have land, and we have land that is in a controlled environment.
Yes.
And so that is a place that we can conduct research, development, testing, and acquisition. That's after we evaluate it. I got to the A before the E. So as we get to evaluate, it helps us to reach some of those military specifications, like we were talking about a little bit earlier. And also, we want to make sure that we're driving forward towards those requirements, especially with battery storage and energy resilience, and being able to have that reliable source is incredibly important. And so you'll find that we use things like enhanced use leases, other transactional authority as projects are a little bit further along, so that you can work within a consortium that sets those requirements and scopes how we get those responses. It lets us go a little bit faster and get a little bit more scoped, but especially battery storage, and I said that before, but I'll come back to it. That is so critically important to make sure that we have access to the energy when we need it, not just when it's available.
And so, I mean, this is obviously a problem that affects the US, it affects the Navy and significantly, but of course, as we know, I mean, climate crisis is something that's very indiscriminate. It doesn't really respect geographic boundaries. And so how do you work with partners, allies, other nations to try and make sure that they have both solutions? We're learning from them, but we're also sharing the solutions that are generated here, because we have such a wellspring of ideas in the US, as well as all the rich ideas that are coming from other locations. How do you try to build partnerships around that?
we consider it an element of interoperability. And so back to that concept of partnership and diplomacy, part of being able to show up is being able to depend on each other fully. And actually, batteries is a great example among partner nations, making sure that we can literally take batteries and switch them out. So if yours is charged and mine isn't, and yours is from the UK and mine is from the US, that we can make that switch, whether we're talking about electric vehicles or we're forward deployed and trying to make sure that as we walk, we're generating our energy and storing it. We want everything to be exactly as interchangeable as it can be. We also look to coastal nations and island nations, especially as the naval services. And so we actually recently had a tabletop exercise that we conducted with all of the Caribbean partners, because there is incredible knowledge that comes from a region and a space that is continually impacted by the same threats in terms of water, storms, too much and too little water, so flooding and droughts. It takes out entire economies for these countries sometimes. There is also incredible indigenous knowledge, and there is something really to be said for the people who have known the land since time immemorial. And we think about technology. We're creating technology that replicates that place-based knowledge, only because we've outpaced the environment's ability to be able to heal itself. So we're taking that knowledge and trying to speed it up with technology. We can't discount those voices and those people and those practices, because it is everything from our natural solutions to our technology and built solutions that actually help us.
And it's that intersection between the two, isn't it, really? Is sort of how the natural solutions inspire our built solutions.
Yes, like dragonflies inspire flight, and looking at things like we use coral to make sure that we are fending off coastal erosion, and also to make sure that we're taking energy out of the waves and understanding how to strengthen the ecosystem. So that we don't see bleaching, and instead we keep that biodiversity. Because when the biodiversity goes off, the temperature is off, and everything else is off, and we start to see those impacts again.
And I mean, I'm just so fascinated with the idea of having that tabletop exercise. And where did you do that? Did you invite it to people? Did you go to them? I mean, how did that work?
So
tell us about that.
Absolutely. So tabletop exercises, for those who are a little more distant from the Pentagon and the military, we try and play through things. I know the other communities also use tabletop exercise, but we try and go through how we will operate, what are going to be the impacts, and how we find our way to mission success, which is what we're doing all the time. And so, based on our strategy called Climate Action 2030. We actually have had a series of tabletop exercises, one a year. Did the first one with the Marines to exercise and validate our assumptions under this strategy. The second one in California to work through coastal and community water and energy resilience. And because I know this is an action and results-based place, immediately found things that we could seed and start doing with educational institutions and partners there, and used these two to go outside of the U.S. because that's important to the way that we operate. So actually held it in Puerto Rico, where we're also able to bring in a lot of students who are working under the Blue Innovation Partnership. So students from the Caribbean nation, students from U.S. Institutions as well, looking specifically at different technologies, applications of data, and other ideas that they had to increase resilience in the region. So we brought everybody together, exercised over the course of the day, and then did what we call a hot wash, and went through where people made mistakes, where people learned better applications, and actually created the connections. We realized one of the missing pieces was that everybody was trying to respond, and nobody was talking ahead of time. It's really hard to call someone in the middle of a hurricane. So while we'll always respond, if we can figure out how to create that shared regional resilience ahead of time, then we're doing better for the region, for the people, for the way that we operate, and for making sure that we have less response to do. And so that was in June, actually right before the hurricane came through there.
And so talking about regions, I mean, one of the regions that the Centre cares very much about is Sub-Saharan Africa, and also we do a lot of work in MENA, and we talk a lot about Egypt as well, of course, because Dina is from Cairo, and it's a region that matters a lot to us. Are there things that you've seen from that part of the world, or exercises that have been done, or insights that you've gleaned? Because obviously enormous amounts of coast around the entire subcontinent and also the Mediterranean basin.
So I'll start with Egypt, because we love Dina, and I'll note the COP that was in Sharm el-Sheikh just a few years ago, which brought attention to the region in a few different ways in terms of energy and water requirements, and also what it means to actually bring focus on climate topics there and work through, because it is kind of a divergent approach depending on who you're talking to and where. And speaking of the importance of geography and the importance of proximity, there is such a water stress and struggle there, and so that was something that came to the forefront of conversations, and looking at water management, looking at, speaking of a history of conflict based on resources. And we're increasingly seeing that type of water stress globally. And I'll go in both directions, both too much water and too little. But as you see that as an example and a historical repeat place where it rises in tension, and then we see throughout the world little places of conflict popping up. It reflected on our organization, our institution, that we need to make sure that we have that water resilience, and so making sure that we are exercising through what that looks like. And so this is a new phrase that I am trying to get out into the atmosphere. Black start exercises are exercises where you cut off all of your energy and then you go without having any of that source. Dry start exercise is my new phrase, where you start with no water.
I see. So black sounds like a blackout.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
I understand where that comes from.
So when there's no when there is no energy source, do your backups work? Are you working without energy? And then
so this would be like a dry out.
So dry
start is better. I like that better. Yes, that didn't go well, did it?
but and maybe there's another similar phrase that somebody's already made. Every time I say this, people say, "What are you talking about?" So dry start, starting from no access to water, and in a place that I know thrives on data and analysis. And as we look at things like AI and supercomputing and the dependencies that we have for humans. If you don't have water for 3 days, you're done. Forget everything else. You can live without your electricity for 3 days, barring a health concern or something like that. But water is so critical and so underappreciated. There is a connection between water and energy that people often forget. As you look at hydropower, water will be the lowest applied use. If you are having a shortage of water, it will not go to energy. It's going to go to health, safety, welfare kinds of things, and so
before it goes to energy.
Before it goes to energy, and so the underpinnings of water, where we have community dependencies, so tying back to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, actually being able to operate, so accessing your data, making sure that all of your sanitary conditions that you expect, like your toilet flushing or your water running, are happening, because if that's not happening, we've got another set of things to respond to. And so the water has really come to the forefront as something that I think we need to pay critically close attention to. And as we see increased regulation on water as well, there's going to be more specific applications of conditions and types and quality of water to use. And as we see more water stress and scarcity, that is a place, if there are any water innovators out there, we have been able to, in our innovation, actually be able to draw water out of the atmosphere. It's a byproduct of hydrogen as an energy source, and so we're looking for where to get water and be able to create, but I think there is going to be an urgent need to have more access to generating and creating the right quality of water.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, that you sort of have these phases of what is top of mind, what do we think about? I mean, water is, in a sense, one of the oldest challenges.
It is.
And we sort of forgot about it, and now it's coming back again. And probably, as you've described, a place where certain kinds of, some communities who've struggled with this are probably the most significant innovators in these areas and find sort of natural solutions that might be very, very powerful. I wonder if I can end sort of mine and say I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment, but, you know, there's a report that just came out from our friends at Engine Ventures, which is an investment fund up the road that MIT helped build, who've been quite significant investors in some of the new fusion energy technologies. They've been thinking about fission. We talked about blue energy and that company. And they sort of posit a world in which, imagine if fusion was successful, that sort of very modular nuclear reactors, sort of small scale, was possible. We might imagine a world of significant energy abundance. And I'm curious, as you think about a different tabletop exercise, which is not the sort of the blackout, but almost the opposite, that we have an enormous amount of energy abundance. What are the other challenges? I mean, how do you think about a different kind of world like that? And perhaps just the reaction of the Navy to some of these new, you know, the sort of re-emergence of some of these technologies around fusion and fission.
I love that question.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
We could do a tabletop exercise. Maybe we should do one here. That would be fun.
But what a wonderful world where we don't worry about energy. I mean that would be so, because think about the things that we could drive with by taking the energy stress off the table. It would desalinization. So we'll have our
the
water,
clear one, isn't it?
our
Yeah,
toilets
it's very,
are gonna
very
flush.
interesting. Yeah.
And we'll have all sorts of ability to rely on things. We won't be concerned about the energy transition, which is on everybody's minds right now, because we'll have the infrastructure to support everything from your new electric vehicle to the high processing power of all of the artificial intelligence that we're putting out into the atmosphere, to things that I worry about, like making sure that we can take care of our nuclear fleet. So we're recapitalizing our 4 public shipyards right now because we need to make sure that we can maintain and sustain our Columbia-class submarines that are coming forward in all of our aircraft carriers. And there's only certain places that we can do that. And so to suspend the energy stress and what needs to be a managed transition with a diversity of sources, that's a pretty neat world to be in.
Interesting idea, but
if we take it off, then I think that we have a bit of fiercer competition because everybody's more focused on mission without trying to figure out some of the logistics that energy can be give and take on. I'll share that we actually just closed a request for information to put nuclear technology on our installation. So speaking of using Navy and Marine Corps land, we put out a solicitation because we think that that is an important part of our energy portfolio. It is not, we don't see a world where that's not. And so, but also we don't know everything. So we invite the innovators in, and first with a request for information to say, we have land, we want energy resilience, we want nuclear technology, and I say nuclear technology and not narrowing it to small or micro or anything else. The full breadth, how do we create maximum resilience? That includes batteries and solar and any other type of energy technology that's out there to make us most resilient, most survivable, have that redundancy and that reliability of energy sources. And so next we'll cull through everybody's questions, comments, and proposals and do a full request for proposals. And we plan to have this going by next summer. That means what looks like right now another decade, but I'm waiting for the innovators to come in.
I think you'll have lots of people from here ready to be engaged in that discussion with you and be partners in that, I think.
And come sooner, but you've got to, we set the requirement and we say this is what we need, come at us with what the right solution sets are, and then let's figure out how we can go as fast as possible because we don't have time to waste on it. We don't have all the ideas. But our powers combined, and it is land and it's ideas and it is the innovation that comes with time and refining what that looks like, so that we get to that really finely tuned solution set that is the advantage that we look for in the military.
Brilliant. Noda, thank you so much. I really appreciate your willingness to just sort of share this whole range of experiences that you're having, and I think take us across an enormous number of different technologies, scenarios, give us a peek into the room during one of those tabletop exercises, and I think also geographically, into places in the world that I think we all care very deeply about. So first let me thank you before I then open it up for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I had so much fun.
So, questions?
How would you like to do this? You want to take a number of questions?
Yeah, I'll take a couple of questions. See, go ahead. And if you just say who you are, introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks so much. My name's Andrew. I'm a grad student here at Sloan at MIT, and I have a question about the geopolitics of climate change. I've read things about a melting Arctic reshifting the global balance of powers, and similarly read things about nations which have historically not been carbon emitters, eventually either through state-sponsored terrorism or collective political action, posing a threat to the U.S. or economies which have for a long time been big emitters of carbon. And so I'm curious the extent to which those are things that you guys talk about in the Department of Defense, and what it would are they credible threats, and what would it take for the Department of Defense to politically put its weight behind more aggressive climate action in the United States?
Okay, I'll tell you what. Do you want to have that's quite a long question, so you can pick a piece of that.
Okay, I'll see if I can use a piece to get to a lot of different elements. So you mentioned the Arctic, and I'm glad that you did, because I meant to bring it up at some point. And so certainly a changing Arctic opens passageways, creates more contested environments for a number of reasons, whether we're talking about more fossil fuels or passageways, potential conflict areas. And so one thing I just wanted to share is that part of making sure that we're operating well there is in the scientific community as well as in the defense community. And so we have an exercise every 2 years, go up into the Arctic Circle and on an ice floe set up a camp. And it is places like the Applied Physics Lab, scientists and researchers that come from Australia, Canada, all sorts of different allied nations. So they're looking at how to operate and what the scientific impacts are, looking at things like when permafrost melts, it releases all sorts of terrible pathogens that we haven't seen in a very long time. That's a real threat to our geopolitical order and our survival as a species, and these are threats that we need to think about how to combat. And so as we look at all of those conditions that happen because of a melting Arctic and changes that are happening there, it goes out into so many other places, which was part of your question as well. And so as we look at some of the folks who are different actors in this space, there is a cognizance around what the science basis of all of these threats in a defense environment are. And so we were talking earlier about the changes to biodiversity are eventually going to make changes to the way that we see impacts of storms and resources and everything else. And then infrastructure, partnership response can also be used as a smart power. And so as you look at the way that different people are playing, it is, are you a true partner or are you an opportunistic partner? And there are two different types that are out there in the atmosphere right now. And so that is one of the places. It is science and it is competition that drive climate action. Not everybody always likes to talk about climate change, but what we universally like to talk about is mission assurance, advantage, and making sure that if we are called to fight, we will win. But we want to make sure that we're not fighting or winning unless it is in the most extreme circumstances. And so that's what deterrence is. So we are backing out and making sure that we're taking all of the steps to create early advantage, make sure that we fend off a crisis before one happens. And that is investing in energy resilience and making sure that we are creating a smart energy portfolio. It's making sure that as we develop our different platforms, ships, aircraft, vehicles, that we are making sure that people can stay on mission because we're removing logistics. Logistics is energy, water, and making sure that we have resources. And so it's a structure that's built in naturally to the way that you do war fighting because we call it logistics. And so as we make sure that people stay on mission, it's making sure that we take off everything that we can anticipate so that we can focus on what we can anticipate. If you go and look at Napoleon, it was weather that got him. And we're in a place right now where as we look at what it means to engage in a conflict is weather and information, and our operational environment as it's affected by both of those things, that will be that gray element and that fringe of who wins and who loses.
Yeah. I just want to, I'm happy that you brought up the Arctic as somewhere that I was recently for one of our NATO Innovation Fund board meetings. It's very extraordinary. We went to Tromsø, and I've never been that far north of the Arctic Circle, and you have a very tangible sense. The University of the Arctic is there, and it's a quite fascinating institution that has its very, very interesting long history of climate research. But with that sort of interplay of geopolitics, and so it's really sort of sharply defined in a very particular location, and you see, I think, that transformation and the resilience that's needed to deal with it. That's front and center.
I'm so glad that you went there, and I'll say that is a place that we do cold weather training with NATO partners to make sure, and that's another example of that interoperability. Yes. That is such an important area when it comes to understanding the geography, making sure that we are training and prepared for what is a temperature extreme, and understanding how to operate together in those really trying circumstances.
Including having our batteries work when it's that cold. I think,
Yes.
It seems like a trivial thing, but I think we have our colleague here visiting who's also from Norway, so we've had a chance to have some of these discussions, so I'm happy to see you. Any other questions that people have? Yes, Georgie, we have a question over here.
Thank you so much, Meredith and Fiona, for this very wonderful discussion. My name's Georgie, a research affiliate here at MIT. My question is about, we often underestimate the role of oceans in terms of providing telecommunications and electricity. Obviously, in the context of the myriad of fibre optics and high voltage direct current cables on the seabed floor, they provide most of our communications and electricity. I'm curious about how you think about that, particularly because there has been also an increase in fibre optic cables in different parts of the world from the United States and going into the Indo-Pacific region, and how you consider that in terms of your role. But also there's another part to that question, which is in relation to the massive demand from generative AI that is looking at how the increase of sort of data centres and where they're located. And I'm sure actually in the context of sort of defence and innovation, this is a discussion too. And so this is a, obviously a very early stage discussion about how that all takes shape in the context of government and the private sector. But curious as to how you're thinking about those problems.
Sure. And in terms of cables, fiber optics, all that we depend on for communications, actually something that came up at the Munich Security Conference this year with force and presence.
Yes.
And that is some of our most critical infrastructure. And so it certainly falls in, and I will say I share the space with our operators as well, who are very cognizant of where all that is and how it works together. But it is how we communicate, it is how we are successful. We do all sorts of efforts to make sure that we are mapping all different areas of the seabed floor, and also looking at things like what other things are trying to come into the area. So everything from migratory patterns to changes in salinity level, changes in temperature. It all affects the way that everything works. And so as we're looking at what it means to be able to communicate effectively at any time, place, it's part of that readiness piece, certainly is of critical importance, and especially also as we look at different types of energy requirements, transmission, everything else. You got to make sure everything's got its place in the world, and that's no exception. But then as we talk about, and I'm sorry, would you remind me of the second part of your question?
Sure. It was a little bit about the role of the data center boom.
Oh, thank you. Yes, of course.
Placement of those assets.
Thank you. That is one of the, I think, best budding examples of public-private partnership. There is no way that we will do one without the other, and so I'll go to Virginia just as an example. There we have a fleet concentration area in the Norfolk Hampton Roads area, so we've got NATO presence, we've got a whole bunch of different installations. We have both Navy and Marine Corps there, and actually a big defense presence in general. Virginia as a state is also looking to bring in new technology tenants. They're looking to build their economy. They're also very open in terms of energy. Dominion Energy has a request for proposal out right now to look at nuclear and other types of technology. And so what you're starting to see is a centering around the investment that the private sector is making, because they're going to have the technology that drives the requirement, but we're all going that way too. And so you're starting to see this ecosystem develop of funding, technology, manning, and material, and also I'd offer information. And so everybody is kind of coming together and figuring out where their part and their play is. But Microsoft just put out their 3 Mile Island, I think about a month ago now. Sure. And so you're starting to see everybody make their plays and their positioning, because we are having a shift. The federal government just announced the Palisades reactor turning back on, because we're going to need that level of energy, and so there's that national signal. It's all coming together, and I think we're seeing this neat development in terms of what I anticipate be legislation that we'll see come out that drives more towards how we work together in that regulatory environment, which we're going to have to make we're going to have to break new ground on how we work together. But it's also going to be something that I think that all of the key stakeholders are going to play through and work out together. And they're starting, at least in the US, I think, to emerge a couple of areas of concentration where you see a big government presence, a big energy requirement, a big technology bet, and a conducive environment through the state economy and makeup.
See, I love that answer. It feels like an innovation ecosystem to me. I spend a lot of time worrying about that. So to me, everything is an innovation ecosystem. But I think you're exactly right, and it's very interesting. And I think we see this in other nations as well, right? As well. So I think, how about?
Nadia has a question.
Yes.
We have a question over here.
Okay, quick. Why don't I bring out to get like 3 quick questions, and then see whether we can do like a wrapping up. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. Yes, thank you both for being here. I'm Nadia Shalabi, and I'm an MIT alum and also a Legatum Center alum back in the day. My question is more operational. So first of all, I'm wondering whether your role and the role of your organization within the Navy and the Marines is more R&D, and you've discussed a lot of that, or more on the operational side. And if so, again, even earlier back in the day, I was in charge of a system for U.S. Transcom that was responsible for all the logistics, generating all the tip feeds, tracking all the deployments, and so on. And you mentioned the deployments, whether they are humanitarian, crisis management, or actual military deployments. So to what extent do you, if at all, collaborate or cooperate with the U.S. Transcom for all of these missions? And is that at all integrated, or it's like pre-operational? So I'm just very curious about that question.
So let me hold that question. So I think the operational piece, how operational versus R&D, and then the cooperation piece, Rory, I think, and then I'm going to give you the last word. So Rory, no?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
David Koisi-Makosa. I'm a student here at Sloan.
Yes.
What initiative or investment within the Department of Navy makes you the most hopeful that the naval services will be able to navigate the challenges of climate change, and what time frame informs the service's decisions about climate impacts on operations?
Okay. Well, that's a hopeful investment and a time frame of action. So brilliant. Rory.
My name is Rory, also a Sloan student, and just curious, like how startups in energy infrastructure and resilience can work with naval installations.
Okay.
What's sort of the front door of interfacing with you?
Okay. So I don't know. Shall we see whether we can wrap those in a very nice ribbon? It feels like we're just following an innovation process. What we've got, we've got a time horizon that we have to think about, startups that we want to have, investment that we need. We need to get operational with the whole thing, and so. I'm wondering whether that's. Or are we? And so that feels like a whole continuum. Over what time horizon? I like that. It's a very interesting question.
My answer is always faster, and so I sometimes don't align as well with government timelines.
Yes.
Like, why isn't it happening now? There is tremendous urgency, and I'll answer just generally first. Tremendous urgency because this will put it in context. So, in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, for every 50 convoys of fuel, we had a Marine that was killed or wounded. And so it's not just, hey, let's go and reduce emissions, and all of these things are great, but it really does come down to logistics and life. And so as we talk about operations and mission success, our mission success should not be, did somebody make it through with the fuel convoy or the water? When somebody signs up and says, hey, I'm going to go and serve in the Navy or in the Marine Corps, and I will give my life for my country, it is my job, and this gets to your question a little bit, I think, in terms of operations. It is my job to make sure that I take every single thing out of the calculus that might cause that to happen. And so every day is too late in my book, just because of that true life or death urgency. When we put someone out into operate into harm's way, it is unacceptable to me to have that be the reason that they are harmed. So that's the pace and the urgency that I work with on these pieces. And so I get, it's tough when people want to play word games sometimes, say, I don't want to call it this or I don't want to call it that. The enemy, whoever is trying to go after that sailor or Marine, is not thinking about what to call it. And they're not thinking about that maybe the reason that they're even out there is because they didn't have the resources, and that's why there's a conflict in the first place. And so there is such there's such a fine-pointed urgency on making sure that we work with speed because of the consequences being so dire to what we're actually considering here. As now be hopeful. So as we move forward and really think about what it means to be the big game changers, I think it's battery storage and making sure that we have a secure supply chain for all of our material that needs to make up that storage, which we're working on in terms of that transition inside of the country. It's a risk analysis. I'll note, I just want to qualify that comment, that we need to figure out where the risk is in the supply chain and just not say that there's aggregate risk. But battery storage is a place that I think is a real game changer. And I do think that our adding the nuclear technology in whatever form we can make it work is also going to be really impactful. But I look at that as an ecosystem too, and I'll include water in there. So we have an installation in Albany, Georgia, that is a net zero energy base. I want to see more of those. I want to see more platforms that can take sustainable aviation fuel or JP5 to manage that transition. And the time horizon, we've seen tremendous. I would say it's come in decades, and I think we're gonna slim here. Batteries, I think we're at a really critical turning point. So I would say I would expect about another 5 years, and we see some really solid stuff in batteries. Nuclear, I think, decade, and I'm hoping we slide it left, but I always want to slide left. But those are two places that in energy, I think that's going to be a real impact to the way that we can reduce our impact on logistics, see that survivability element, that redundancy, that resiliency, so that we're actually focused on what we need to be doing, which is first diplomacy, then deterrence, and then if we got to go defend, we'll have the stuff to do it. In terms of working with naval installations, we do have different types of industry days and places that you can come and contribute. Through the Office of Naval Research, if you've got kind of specific things that you're targeting, that is another good way. And we have the Defense Innovation Unit, which is another place. And I think there's a DIU.
There is an office here in Boston.
Okay, I thought so. So they're a great way in as well. And then especially as there's specific asks coming in through other transactional authority, if you do have a developed idea, participating in one of the consortiums, which sometimes can be expensive and other times not, but there's other pathways in. That's where you'll see a requirement and a fast track in. And then also if you have individual installations in mind, that's another place. Go talk to the commanding officer. It is really a place-by-place innovation opportunity, and there's all sorts of pathfinders, and I don't like pilots because they sound like one-offs, pathfinder projects, so that you can set the conditions for being replicable. In terms of operation, I think I consider it to be a mix. So we want to make sure that we're setting the conditions and testing things so that we can accelerate, replicate, and get it out into an environment. But this is everything from going into truly austere environments where it's specific, bespoke types of developments that need that are going to support a handful of very special operators, but that's tremendously operational. Another part of my portfolio is all of our buildings, real property, all of those places, and so. It is the day-to-day tactical to the very strategic, how do we go and make institutional changes. In terms of Transcom specifically, my office doesn't really go through any of the geographic or combatant commands as much. We'll go up through at the department level and kind of meet on those initiatives and requirements. Fuel is where we cross most with Transcom in terms of those logistics pieces. We actually just realigned inside of the Department of the Navy all of our fuel depots, and so even that management is a little bit different now. And between Defense Logistics Agency and Transcom, they kind of switch some of their roles too. So we're in a renaissance of logistics, I guess, of sorts in some ways. But it is everything from the research to the application, but in partnership with a lot of other parts of the department. I hope that
Brilliant.
answers your question.
Yeah. So, sorry, let me just in the interest of time, and I would love to carry on these conversations.
Oh, sorry, I wouldn't
No, you were perfect. I just want to make sure that we wrap it up so that I can do a wrap up. We can continue the conversation over what I think is some delicious looking food over there. So, and I want to just give a real shout out to the Legatum team, Hatham and others, and Donovan, and all of you really for just supporting this. You guys always do a wonderful job, and you also make us feel so welcome and so elegant with our lovely flowers and what have you. So, thank you for that. I also just want to thank all of you. You know, this is an unusual conversation for the Legatum Center, but I think giving us this opportunity to really talk through the intersection of innovation, which we care so deeply about here at MIT, of climate as, you know, a profoundly important problem, but understanding both its influence and impact on national security and defense, but also the way in which, you know, the Navy and the Office of the Navy is really sort of supporting some of these solutions, you know, being the change maker, asking for those tough requirements, bringing people together, and being a place where people can both test and scale, I think is really fascinating and something that we're all learning from you. So thank you very much, Meredith. I appreciate it.
You are so welcome. And I wanted to give you something. I don't know if you've ever gotten a challenge coin before. For those who have not been around the military as much, we have challenge coins, and you present it to someone for good work, contributions, job well done. So I wanted to give you one of my challenge coins. Have you ever gotten one before?
I have one from NATO, but I'm going to put this very, very specially with it, if I may.
It comes in a handshake.
Yes, can we
and I
send it?
wanted to make sure that, here, I'm going to pick this up. I wanted to make sure that you didn't have the thing happen where it drops to the ground and it makes that terrible metal noise.
All right, I'm going to
so
do that
it comes
very
in a handshake. It's
especially.
like palm in a basketball.
That's hard for a foreigner, but I'm going to do my best.
Well, thank you for hosting
Thank you,
me.
and I'm absolutely honoured to have that. Thank you so very much. That's really special.
You are so
and I'm
welcome.
deeply appreciative. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. This
Thanks
was so
very
fun.
much.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.
You got a good Navy ship.
Yes, look at that. That's absolutely gorgeous.
Oh,
Just some photos.
here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say I'll tuck it. I was not very elegant with the.
Thank you all. Please stick around. The secretary will be here. We'll have a few minutes to stick around with us for conversations and, of course, food in the back. Thank you all for coming, and
I just knew I needed to wrap up.
we'll see you soon.
For the moment.
Yeah.